8.4, rhombuses, rectangles, and squares. Okay? A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. And a square is both a rectangle and a rhombus. It has 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. I like to think of it as the rectangle and rhombus had a baby and it was a square. Okay, because it has both qualities of a rectangle and a rhombus. Hey, you'll remember it if I say it like that. I know it's silly. Okay, rhombus coloring. A quadrilateral is a rhombus if and only if it has 4 congruent sides. A quadrilateral is a rhombus if and only if it has 4 congruent sides. A rectangle corollary, a quadrilateral is a rectangle if and only if it has 4 right angles. A rectangle is a quadrilateral is a rectangle if and only if it has 4 right angles. A quadrilateral is a square if and only if it is both a rhombus and a rectangle. Pay attention, please. Okay. A parallelogram is a rhombus if and only if its diagonals are perpendicular. So that's the new one. Okay? That diagonals of a rhombus must be perpendicular, must meet at 90-degree angles. Theorem 8.12, a parallelogram is a rhombus if and only if each diagonal bisects the opposite side. So that means if we draw a rhombus, okay, we know all 4 sides are the same length. We also know that its diagonals meet at 90 degrees. And we know that the diagonals cut each angle in half. So all the angles are cut in half. Okay? A parallelogram is a rectangle if and only if its diagonals are congruent. So if we've got a rectangle, we know we have 4 right angles. We know opposite sides are congruent. That's part of a parallelogram. All of these opposite sides have to be congruent. But we know their diagonals, the whole things, are equal to each other. Okay? So what do you think a square would be? What do we know about a square's diagonals then?
It has 4 sides.
We know that a square has 4 sides, yes, but what do we know about a square's diagonals? So if we're drawing a square, and I tell you a square has to be everything a rhombus, those diagonals must be what? What do we know about a rhombus's diagonals?
They bisect.
They do bisect, but that's for all parallelograms. A rhombus diagonals are perpendicular. So if we have a square, their diagonals must also be perpendicular. But what about a rectangle? They must also be what to each other? Congruent. This whole thing must be congruent to this whole thing. Okay? All right, these are important. They are so important that we are going to do some vocabulary words. Okay, let's see. We've got what here? Shh, I'm not sure why you're talking. I'm not sure why you're talking. You know you're not supposed to. You know you're not supposed to. Shh. So let's do this. I am going to give my first word to put on the vocabulary word wall, rhombus, to Eric. I am going to put my next word, rectangle, to Michael Evans.
Ah, shit.
You know that's being recorded and you know I'm going to send it to your mom. Okay. Next, we've got square. Square I am going to give to Stacy. Next, stop. Next, ladies and gentlemen, I've got my rhombus corollary, which you have to draw what it says up there, and I'm going to give it to Jane. Okay, you're going to draw the picture. Okay, put it back. All right, rectangle corollary. I am going to give to Ariel. I want you to learn so bad. Okay, stop. All right, what else we got? What else we got? I have rectangle coloring. Ooh, I need more. What else is here? Ooh, 8.12 and 8.13. Let's see, what do I have left? Sabrina is going to do 8.12. And I'm going to give 8.13 to Justin. Okay. All right. Good vocab words. Okay. Let's move on. I want to look at example 3, I believe it is. So those proofs you don't have to do. Let's move on to example 3. Oh, square coloring. Oh, thank you, Philip. You just volunteered, huh? There you go. Okay. So we're going to look at example 3. Can you tell me what is special? Excuse me. Can you tell me what is special about a rhombus? So if we look at the other side of the paper, what's special about a rhombus? Yes, Shane?
4 congruent sides.
4 congruent sides. Okay, what else? What else is special about a rhombus? So who's got, does anybody have 811? I didn't. Oh, I'll have to make that one up myself. A parallelogram is a rhombus if and only if its diagonals are perpendicular. Okay. And anything else about a rhombus? Oh, diagonals bisect a pair of opposite angles. Bisect a pair of opposite, OPP stands for opposite, angles. Okay, let's talk about rectangles. What is special about a rectangle? So what is the definition of a rectangle, first of all? Turn it over. What does it say? 4 right angles. That means all those angles are how many degrees? Good. Okay, what else is special about a rectangle? What's the rectangle color? It's got 4 right angles, right? Who's got 813? Who's got 813? Justin? What does 813 say on the front of the paper? Diagonals are congruent. Why wouldn't a rhombus's diagonals be congruent? Should we draw a picture?
No.
Let's look real quick. We've got a rhombus. We've got a, oops, Miss Murphy's crazy rectangle. Okay, so let's look at the rhombus. Does it make sense that the red diagonal has to be longer than the blue one? Right, because their vertices are further apart this way. Okay, what about the rectangle? Their vertices are the same way apart. Okay, Shane, will you put the door closed for me? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move on to example 4. Let's move on to example 4. Okay. So we've got a rectangle, and it's not drawn here, so let's draw it in. We've got a rectangle ABCD. How do I know where to put the ABCD? Does it matter?
No.
As long as I do it in order. As long as it says A and then I list B right next to it, then C, and then D. Okay, but I could have started A down here with A, B, C, D. That would have been fine. Okay, angles A and C. Are they always congruent, sometimes congruent, or never congruent? Always, because that's the definition of a rectangle. Okay, what about sides A, B, and B, C? Are they always, sometimes, or never?
Never.
Sometimes. Why are they sometimes? Shh. Raise your hands. Why is it sometimes? Yes, Chris.
Because a square could be a rectangle.
Because a square could be a rectangle, and a square would have all the four sides would be congruent. Very nice. Okay. AC and BD. I'm sorry, I'm teaching up here, not back there. AC and BD. Are they always congruent, sometimes congruent, or never congruent? They are always congruent because your diagonals are always congruent for a rectangle. 100% of the time. Okay, let's go down to example 5. We're going to go down to example 5. And we are going to plot these 4 points. Because we're going to figure out if it's a rectangle, rhombus, square, or none of these. Okay? You need to be doing this, Michael. Where's your pencil? Good. Now you need to do this. Okay. So, A is -1, 4. B is -3, 2. C is 2, -3. And D is 4, -1. Okay. So let's talk about this for a minute. If it was a rectangle, what things would be true about it that I might be able to use? The diagonals would be congruent, so we could do that. If it was a square, would my diagonals also be congruent? Yes, so that doesn't really help. Okay. Only 2 of the sides are congruent. Okay, so Phil, if we want to use your idea, we would first have to prove that the diagonals were congruent. How would we prove that the diagonals are congruent? What would we use?
Slope.
Does slope prove length? Distance formula. Okay, so we need 2 distance formulas. Okay, so but I have to know if the diagonals are congruent, it could also be a square. So to justify it to being just a rectangle, we would have to prove only, 2 sides and 2 sides are congruent. 2 pairs are congruent. So how would we use that? What would we find then? How would we find out if they were congruent? What kind of formula would we use? Distance again. So we need 4 distance formulas. Who wants to do 6 distance formulas? Anybody?
Nobody.
Okay. If we don't want to use the diagonals, which I think is a great idea, but I don't want to do 6 distance formulas, what else does a rectangle have that say, because, what else does a rectangle have that, say, a parallelogram doesn't have, or what's different about it? Because if 2 pairs of opposite sides are congruent to each other, I can still say it's a parallelogram, right? So what does a rectangle have that a parallelogram doesn't?
Diagonal. It says if the diagonals are.
Right, but if we don't want to do 6 distance formulas, what else is on that sheet that we could use? What about the angles? Are the angles different for a parallelogram than a rectangle? Rectangles all have what kind of angles?
4 right angles.
4 right angles. Okay, so that means that 2 lines are what to each other to form a right angle? Are they parallel or are they? They're perpendicular. So I could use for 2 sets I'm going to say 4 right angles.